And now I'd like to welcome to the program Artis Pabriks, former defense minister of Lithuania. Hello, sir, and thank you for joining us today.
Yes, former defense minister of Latvia.
Okay, I got to get on my producer for that one. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, and sorry for my mistake.
My pleasure.
Now, we have this latest news. You know, I'm sure you probably have seen that we had a few fires lately. Of course, our government saying that there was nothing in connection with Russia, but we do have arrest of 9 people today, some of whom may have been connected with sabotage operations here in Poland. So now, moving up to Latvia, are you facing similar problems right now? Have you seen acts of sabotage against your country?
I would not call them an act of sabotage, but we already have been expecting that this summer will be hot also politically, because elections for European Parliament is approaching, elections in US for president is approaching, and about 2 months ago we had such kind of act also against our Museum of Occupation, where during the night a Molotov cocktail was breaking through the window of a director of Occupation Museum. The room was burning. Our secret service, our security services found there were 3 people responsible for this. Obviously, they have been somehow connected also with some Russian contacts through possibly Telegram channel. So in short, I would like to say that not only the border countries with Russia or Belarus, like Poland or Latvia or even Finland or Sweden would expect something, but clearly, as long as the decisive moves are not made in the West to support Ukraine more strongly, the Russians are putting up the heat and trying to challenge all the Western system more and more, and not only militarily, but also internally, because I would say that the sleeping cells, and as some analysts would call them, sorry for my expression, useful idiots, they are quite a bit in many European countries and also across the seas.
So now, I know when it comes to time and the timeline, you mentioned the approaching elections in the United States, but also the upcoming elections to the European Parliament. And what is the aim of these acts of sabotage that we have been speaking about here on this hour in Poland, but also, for example, the one that you mentioned that has taken place in Latvia?
I would say there are a number of targets. Traditionally, Russians have been targeting Baltic countries, and trying to describe them as failed states which cannot control their security, which cannot provide social services for their people. So basically to describe them as inefficient countries which do not deserve independent existence. And that might be reflected among some parts of population, particularly maybe ethnic Russian population here. But on the other hand, you can see a very similar patterns also in many, many Western countries, not only Central or Eastern Europe, but also Western countries, which have been described as simply giving away all the traditional values, Christian values, and etc. So they are playing basically with any political movement which somehow can create fragmentation of societies, disbelief in ourselves. And of course, they are very much targeting everybody, either personalities or organizations which are trying to support Ukraine, because they simply want to weaken us by any types of means. So if there is some kind of a crack in the Western either politics or security, they will fill this crack with so-called water and freeze it to make it larger. So we must expect only more difficult times in front of us.
Right. Another something that we have in common is that there's lots of Belarusians in your country or throughout the Baltics in Poland that have escaped the regime. Our previous guest, Sergei Arofiev, said that it would be a big mistake to target these populations. However, we know that Russia is exploiting this to some degree. Tell me, how do we weigh the balance between supporting all of these dissidents that are essentially fleeing these repressive regimes, but as well as taking into account our own security?
Well, there is no one medicine for this, but in general, I think that we must have vetting processes in place for security services. And there are many good people here, either ethnic Ukrainians, Belarusians, or Russians, but there are also the ones who hate freedoms, who hate our countries, and who simply want to see the Russian Empire to return. Such people also exist. So what we have to avoid, we must avoid to put them in one bench, in one group, because these people are really different people. So we have to try to still be capable to characterize and analyze them individually. That's the only way.
Do you think we're spending enough on our own counterintelligence? Let's take Latvia, for instance. Do you think that maybe we need to beef up our counterintelligence in all of these countries to be able to effectively fight this increasing threat?
If you will ask counterintelligence or intelligence, do they have enough financing? Of course, they will say no. I have been dealing with agencies for quite a long time. And substantially, they are, of course, correct, because we should not speak, for instance, about 2% when we speak about security or defense. If we remember, longer time ago, during the Cold War times, countries like Britain and other Western countries, they have been spending 4 and 5% for defense and security. So we must understand that we do have a quite stormy waters in front of us. And that would mean that security must be one of the major, if not the major priority. But of course, we must somehow balance this with also our economic development. But if we think that we might save somewhere on defense, military development or security, will be totally wrong, because this is a crucial times, and Russians are watching us, Chinese are watching us. So the most important thing is to convince our Western partners that they must support Ukraine in a way that they can, for instance, target objects in Russia, that they receive all the missiles they need, either from US or Taurus from Germany. So we have also a large diplomatic work on us. And if we will manage to convince our partners in the West, then eventually we would be also more safe ourselves.
So my next question is, it's based on what you've just been saying, and I want to go back to the cracks that you mentioned that these Russian spies, or Putin, of course, can use to widen the divide in the approach of the allies to Ukraine. What can specifically Poland, Latvia, the Baltic states do to try and, well, make these cracks in the approach to Ukraine smaller so that the formula is more, well, let's say that everyone is on the same page when it comes to on how to support Ukraine and how to move forward?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes, in my view, amongst the Western countries is that they do not understand really that threat what Russia is posing, and Russia plays them very nicely by playing the fear of escalation, playing the fear of nuclear war. And we have been here in the region going through this for decades. So the only thing what I can advise is to stick together, countries like Baltic states, Poland, Nordic countries, actually, because I believe that Sweden and Finland understands quite a bit as well, and they are on the same page with us. And simply to try to also have this diplomatic language strong enough. Because if you heard in the last days also one of the former top diplomats, Madame Nuland, have been asking to allow to target positions in Russia. We have such person like, for instance, Ben Hodges, general, who is saying the same like I'm actually doing. Mm-hmm. So this is a work and the responsibility of our politicians, ministers, diplomats, and also public diplomacy.
Right. Well, I'd say politicians need to make up their mind, especially in the Western countries. I have no doubt that the politicians in our region don't have their mind made up. But I want to ask you about something that President Zelensky said the other day, saying that, essentially the United States doesn't want Ukraine to be victorious because the United States is too afraid of what happens to Russia if they fail. How do we address those concerns? Because I think I think that he's pretty much spot on. I think that the politicians in the United States have not made up their mind because they are so worried of a repeat of say, the loose nuclear content in the 90s, if we all remember that.
Well, if you are afraid of anything, then you should not go into the battlefield. At this moment, Russia is basically fighting not only Ukraine, but the West. If Ukraine falls, then United States, the Western Europe, us, might be very much involved in the war ourselves. So I would say that, yes, there are many politicians in positions now in Washington who think that they should by no means avoid any type of escalation by not providing Ukraine enough with weapons. But this is exactly what Kremlin wants. They want the Western societies to be scared of further escalation, while Russia itself, actually, during the last half a year, have been escalating quite a bit. My personal judgment is very simple, just like it was a year ago. Yes, Zelensky is right that all the deliveries and support to Ukraine is coming too small amounts and too late. If we would give the necessary support, like it would be, for instance, under the Reagan policy, which in my view was the one while you and us, we are now living in free countries, then Ukrainian war and Russian invasion already would be over and Ukraine would win. So we need Reagan-type thinkers in Washington.
Well, I certainly hope we get those thinkers and that they get to the forefront. Well, sir, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Artis Pabriks, former Defense Minister of Latvia. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.